Hello. Thank you for joining our SILS Alumni AMA Ask Me Anything today. I'm your host, Lori Haight, and today we have Jane Frazier joining us from Australia. Jane graduated with her MSIS from SILS in 2013 and is currently a Senior Applied Information Scientist at Xero, a cloud-based accounting software platform for small businesses with over 2.7 million global subscribers. Welcome, Jane.
Thank you so much, Lori.
I want to remind viewers that there is a link in the description box if you have any additional questions to share, and we'll get to as many of them as possible in the time we have together. So Jane, I wanted to start off by asking you, why SILS? What brought you to SILS?
Why SILS? Well, I actually started my journey at SILS fully intending to be a music librarian. I did my undergrad and my first master's degree in voice. And, from the time I was about 16, I thought, I'm going to be a professional opera singer and I'm going to sing classical music for my whole life. And I got through all of my education and I loved every moment of it. Very creative, lots of collaboration, lots of music history, musicology, etc. And I ended up ultimately wanting sort of a different lifestyle than you would get from being a professional singer. In one short sentence sum up, I did not want to live the rest of my life out of a suitcase. So I thought, what are the things about my experience so far in life and in my education that I feel like I could really, really deeply enjoy and find very, very satisfying as a career, that also kind of meld better with my personality and the way that I want to have a life. And I thought, my gosh, I love musicology. I love music research. I love music manuscripts. I'm going to go to school to be a music librarian. And yes, fully intended to do that. So SILS, I went to high school in Chapel Hill. I went to Chapel Hill High School. So I obviously was very familiar with the city and the university. I went to UNCG for my undergrad, and then I did my first master's degree at University of Michigan. And I did apply at several different schools. My decision at the end was either Indiana University or UNC. And I ultimately chose UNC for a variety of reasons, including the fact that I would have more freedom. It wasn't such a strict music librarianship track. I could explore a lot more things if I wanted to. UNC is a really fantastic school. And also all of my family lived there. So that was a really good perk as well. Yes, so that's how I came to SILS. Yes.
And what has been your career path since leaving SILS?
It's been pretty, I've really straddled the line between public sector and academia and private sector. So right out of SILS, I got a job at a startup in RTP. It was a really small tech startup. And we were owned by Stanley Gibbons, which is basically the largest stamp collecting company in the world, largest and oldest. They're based in London. And the idea behind the startup that they owned was that they had all of this amazing metadata and knowledge about postage stamps for people who collect and who invest in stamps. And they wanted to be able to basically digitize all of that, make it available in some sort of master data management system or cataloging system so that they could come up with more elegant, streamlined ways of creating these print catalogs that people use to purchase and do their stamp collection on a day-to-day basis, and also to populate an e-commerce website, which was basically like eBay for collectibles, like postage stamps, comic books, baseball cards, etc. So I, went to some job fairs and spoke to lots and lots and lots of people. I got a chance to, go talk to people who didn't really know what information science was and try to sort of convince them that what I do is important and desirable, which was really interesting, trying to sort of frame what I do in a way that they're going to understand, because that's not always the case, as we all know, in our space. And so I got offered a product manager role. And in my interview, I was like, that sounds awesome. What's a product manager? So I was really, thrown headfirst into a team of basically myself and a bunch of software developers. And we used our creativity to build this cataloging system. And it was an amazing, professional experience. It was very stressful because I had never managed anyone before, let alone a bunch of software developers. I kind of had no business doing what I was doing at the time, as far as, being the product manager of a team of a bunch of software developers. But I learned really, really fast, and the skills that I had were super valuable. After I was at Stanley Gibbons and the startup, my partner and I, who also went to UNC, we decided that we wanted to move overseas. And we didn't really know where we were going to go, but we thought, let's go live somewhere else other than the US for a while. Let's try it out while we're still young. And so he was applying for jobs out of his PhD. And we ended up kind of having opportunities either in Sydney, Australia, or in Melbourne, Australia. So we figured out, well, we're moving to Australia. Let's figure out which city. And we thought, we'll try it out for a few years and see how it goes. And we just have never left. And we love it here. We have an Australian child now, who has a full-blown Australian accent, which is pretty funny. We're here, we're settled. It is very challenging living very far away from our families, but we really love it here. So back to the sort of career path. When I moved to Australia, it was really tough professionally because it was basically like starting out from scratch. I didn't know anybody. However, Jane Greenberg, who is no longer at UNC, she was my master's advisor, and she knew people at the Australian National Data Service, which is basically the research data management support and infrastructure group for all of the universities in Australia.
Oh.
Now is called the Australian Research Data Council. And I got a job as a data librarian there. And my job, I had two main pieces to my job. One was being a research data management specialist to consult with different universities around the country. I focused mainly on the ANU, Australian National University in Canberra. So I did a lot of traveling to Canberra, which was pretty cool. It's funny because the flight from Melbourne to Canberra was a lot shorter than my actual drive from my house to the airport. So I had a lot of car travel rather than airline travel. But I got a lot of experience sort of understanding the practicalities of working between organizations. So, I was at the Australian National Data Service. I was working with the ANU, sort of cross institution collaboration, and understanding what the real practical research data management issues are at a university. So that was one part of my job. The other part was working with software developers again. We were building basically an ontology and controlled vocabulary management system. So I think probably, as we all know, there are lots and lots of controlled vocabularies that exist around the world, many of which are used for research. So describing research or describing academic papers or describing research data or all three or none. And what we were working on was building a system where teams that were developing controlled vocabularies for research. So, for example, the Integrated Marine Observing System, which is a group in Australia that, they'll take a ship out into the ocean and they will measure salinity. So they need to have a specific controlled vocabulary to be able to, in a standard way, measure that salinity. They could use our tool to manage that controlled vocabulary and to publish it on the web so that it could be used in systems to describe research and data. And from there, we basically built the world's first national controlled vocabulary system, which was awesome. It was a fantastic experience. And it just so happened that part of the tooling we were using is an off-the-shelf ontology management software called Pool Party. And I was approached by one of the private sector companies in Australia who were interested in using that tool. So I was sort of poached into industry from academia. I spent the next several years of my professional life working at Seek, which is an employment platform. So basically, hirers can post job ads, and people can apply to those jobs. So we were thinking about how do you match a really fantastic job with a really fantastic candidate, and bring employers and professionals together. And so I went over to industry. And at that point, I was first working in the search team, and working in a small portion of the search team that was structured data. So we managed all of the controlled vocabularies to do with employment. So things like what is the canonical list of all the role titles that people might want to have, software developer or gardener, like literally everything under the sun. And things like what are all of the locations in Australia and New Zealand and our other markets that have employment opportunities in them, or what is the controlled list of requirements that people might need to have in order to fulfill a job. So you must have a Australian driver, like an active Australian driver's license. So structuring up that kind of information. Mm-hmm. So I was brought in to bring the company up from a place where they were dealing with a lot of that data manually, in spreadsheets, lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of spreadsheets, into a space where we could have one central system where we manage those controlled vocabularies, where we would make an update, add a new role title, add a new role requirement, and that information would flow through to the systems that needed to consume them. And I really cut my teeth as a professional at Seek. I learned an incredible amount, and my team ended up being merged with the data science group at Seek. And that's kind of how I got into the machine learning, AI, data science space. So I sort of kind of fell into it. I ended up, working on things like an API that would do named entity recognition. So let's say when you create a job ad, you want to attract the right kind of candidate. So you're going to, and what the right kind of candidate means is different for every company. So you decide to call your job ad $$, $$, software ninja, $$, $$. Like that's, is going to attract a certain specific, type of candidate, which is awesome. Exactly what you want. However, $$, $$, software ninja, $$, $$, is not super meaningful, from a data description standpoint. And also is something that we would find really challenging to link or relate to other similar job ads. So our API would take that and would resolve it to something from our canonical list, like software developer. And, it would return back what we thought was, a more standardized form of that term. So thinking about one of the things that I have thought about since then and now in my job is, when people are using a system, they have a certain mental model that they're using. And usually it just has to do with what they want to do at the time. What's going to be the most beneficial for them? And inevitably, the mental models that people use when they're using a system are different from the way that we in the back end want to use that data to help them in the future. So trying to kind of bridge the gap between those two things is kind of my sweet spot. And it's something that I love doing, and I learned about how to think about at SILS. So Seek, I spent about 4 years there. And then I decided that I thought I really wanted to go back into academia. So I spent a very brief time back in the e-research group at Monash, and then kind of decided, actually, I think industry is better for me. It's sort of the pacing and the lifestyle that I was able to have. I don't travel as much to go to conferences in industry, but the type of work and the way of working is definitely suited to me better. So I happen to know quite a lot of folks who were at Seek who moved to Xero into the data team, and was able to use my connections there to move to Xero. I had heard a lot of really good things about the company, sort of from a culture standpoint and from like an ethics in data standpoint, doing the right thing, trying to improve the performance of the system and make it better for customers, but also, protecting the data in the right ways and protecting the rights of the users in the right ways. And, sort of being a company that wants to do the right thing as far as data and other stuff. So I started out at Xero as metadata governance lead. And one of the things that I was thinking about a lot early on was, if we were able to, in an ideal world, capture and structure all of the metadata about all the data around the company, which is, weird and wonderful, millions of different types of data coming from all different sorts of products. If we can come up with a semi-structured pattern for representing that metadata, we can use it to populate a data catalog and then have that available for everyone across the organization to use. So, I work in this part of the business, and I see that you over in your part of the business are using this piece of data that seems really amazing, and I could really use it. Now I know it exists, and I know where it is and who the contact person is to talk to about it if I want to learn more. And then, metadata governance lead. So one thing I will say now is that I, up until now, never had a role that actually had information scientist in the title. And I, in my experience, at least, that is very rare. You don't often see job ads for information scientist, or at least I don't, in my experience. I've always had role titles that are, just kind of like, we kind of picked them out of thin air to decide, what the role should be, what it kind of is. We think it's going to be this, so we'll name it this. It's very, very creative, but also the role title doesn't necessarily matter a ton, but what you're doing is what's important. There's a balance to strike there, definitely. But I was sort of approached by the head of science evaluation and measurement in the data team. So the data team does lots and lots of things. There's a whole arm of the team that is building an analytical data environment. So, bringing together, being able to pull data out of all of the operational systems and having a system that everyone can use to do analysis on data. We have data governance, and so that was data governance and strategy, evangelism, data governance and strategy, which was the group that I was in, and science evaluation and measurement, along with quite a few other groups. So the head of SEM approached me, and he was like, "Hey, do you want to actually call yourself an information scientist?" And I said, "Hell yes." I do. And so I kind of moved into a different part of the data team, and now I'm working with other applied scientists. We actually we don't use the term data science at Xero. We use applied science. The idea around that is that data science is such a new term and is so fast moving and can mean so many different things to so many people, and often is to deal with really experimental pieces of work or proofs of concept. And we really focus on shipping products, so actually getting things into production. And wanted to create a space where that is, the type of people that we want to hire are going to actually ship products rather than just do a lot of experimentation. So we didn't have information science at all. So my manager and I basically just, we came up with the job ad ourselves for my role. And thought a lot about, what do we want to call this thing? How do we decide how to describe it? And also, most importantly, what is the scope? We can make information science everything for everybody, but I will never get anything done. And lots of people will come to me and say, "Hey, can you help fix up my Confluence space?" Or, "Hey, can you come help me fix up my enumerated list, because it has a million things in it and none of them make sense." So we really worked on refining the scope of the role and the space. So that's kind of where I am now.
That's excellent. There's so many follow-up questions I have that from part of that. One that came in was, what is a typical day like for you?
Good question. Typical day. So I work 4 days a week. In Australia, part of the reason why we love living in Australia is the really amazing work-life balance. Like in knowledge work, or people who are sort of paid to think, in the space where I think all of us are in. It's actually very typical for people to be permanent part-time. So people who work 4 days a week, or people who work 3 days a week, which is something that I, at least in my experience, didn't find in the US. And so I have kind of 2 days a week where I am at the keyboard. I am working, I am writing, I am coding. My team, the very small team that I'm in that's working on building a specific product, we intentionally have 2 days of the week where we try to have as few meetings as possible so that we can get our work done. The other 2 days are kind of meeting heavy days, one of which a lot of us who are in Melbourne come into the office. So I work 3 days from home, 1 day from the office, and we all try to come in on the same day so that, we can actually go to whiteboard together, which is still kind of a novelty since COVID. And at least for us. And, I think it works really, really well for the people in the data team at Xero, at least. People love working from home. We love it. The thing about it is that you have to work really hard at communicating and collaborating asynchronously, especially because we have, most of my specific team are in Melbourne. We have one team member in Sydney, and we have one team member who is just outside of Auckland in New Zealand. So there is a time difference, and we have to actively work. Part of our job is to refine our ways of working. So how are we going to get this decision about this specific thing made without taking up everybody's time? Is somebody going to write a position paper about it, and then we all debate and decide, okay, yes, that's the way we're going to go, or no, we need to revisit this one other specific thing. So we do a lot of refining of the ways that we work. So we do lots of retrospectives. We think about the ways that we work a lot. Yes.
You've worked at multiple organizations that have been recognized as great places to work across the globe. And it sounds like that was pretty intentional on your part.
Yes, I would say so.
And do you think that was more because of the global organization options, or did that just because of the people you knew who were in those places?
Yeah, I don't know. I suppose I am sort of a global worker, but I don't feel like that was necessarily something I was like, I want to be a global worker. It was more, I love doing what I do, and I live in a city where there are opportunities for working in amazing teams that just so happen to be international. It is challenging. It's definitely challenging. I have so the 2 other information scientists at Xero. So we have 3 people in our function. They are in Toronto. And that basically means that for half the year, we don't see each other. We have never met in person. And for half the year, we kind of just do everything on Slack. We record messages and we chat to one another. The other half of the year, we try to get, our strategy work and our collaboration done. It is challenging. And I think it's something that we in the data team at Xero are really good at in some ways and still have a lot of work on in other ways. A lot of it has to do with, your own personality and the ways that you like to work and the ways that you're successful. But it's definitely challenging, and it's like, it has to actually be part of the work. It just doesn't happen on accident.
That's great insight. You mentioned a few times already about data science versus information science. And with your current organization already having a data science unit, what were some of the ways you were able to advocate for a separate information science space?
Yeah, great question. And this is something that I think about a lot. And the way that we started thinking about it, my manager and I, who sorry, just one moment. We were very intentional to try not to create a division. It's not we're the information scientists and they're the data scientists and we do this and they do that. It was more how can we share the responsibility for all the parts of work that we're doing and all the science that we're doing. So the way that we kind of frame it is when you're building a machine learning product or an AI product or a data science product, whatever you want to call it, something that has an algorithm in it. There are people who have expertise and who specialize in building, refining, and training models. So machine learning models. And there are, but that's not the only thing that we have to think about. We have to think about all the data that flows through that model or that model is trained on. So I think the term garbage in, garbage out gets talked about a lot, where, you train a model on racist data, your model's going to be racist. Like it literally will be. And there are all of these known and unknown biases or ethics issues that we deal with creating machine learning products. And the way that we think about sort of data science and information science is that there are people that focus on that model, tuning the model, refining the model, et cetera, et cetera. And then there are people whose main focus is on the data. So why does the data look like it does when it enters the system or when it exits the system? What was that mental model that people had when they created the data in the first place? And what do we want to do with it? And everyone who's doing all of this work needs to understand at least partially all of those parts, but not everyone can be a specialist in everything. So the people who are experts in building models, they, mostly that's sort of the center of their universe. The people who focus on the data, why does the data look like it does? How should it be structured? What does it need to look like in order to have the right outcome? We all share knowledge with one another and we work together every day. So in our team, in the science and sort of the science evaluation measurement and data applications engineering part of my business, we have science syncs every single day. So every day in the afternoon, we have a half an hour session where we just talk about whatever scientific problems we're dealing with. And we just do debate. And once a week, we have a science review with some of the principal and higher level scientists in the company, where we bring our ideas to them and they basically, we try to poke holes in our logic. So it's very rigorous. There's a lot, there's continuous thinking, there's continuous improvement of our scientific thinking. How are we going to do what we do? Yeah. So it's everyone does everything, but not everyone can do everything at all the time. Is how we think about it. Yes. It's sort of about that diversity of thinking. Having diverse teams is gonna provide better outcomes.
Yeah, that was very helpful in that analogy. And one of the last questions I had is how do you use professional development to stay current in some of this work that you're doing to make sure you're current with what's happening in the field? So is there professional development organizations that you're involved in, or was that at an earlier point and now there's other ways that you're staying current, or what does that look like?
That's a great question. I'm not super active in any professional organizations right now. Honestly, there's so much content out there to learn that I just trying to stay on top of the things that I need to be reading up on right now is enough. For example, the data team at Xero, we have a channel on Slack called DT Brain Food. And it's literally all day, every day, people are posting articles from the internet that are interesting and thought-provoking in our space. So in the data and machine learning space. And it is too much. Like, nobody can read all of it. Nobody. And there's just, it's information overload just within my own organization. You really have to pick and choose what you are going to look at to maintain your focus on what you're doing. So I definitely keep in touch with some of the professors that I have worked with at SILS, and with some of my colleagues from my previous roles. And yeah, honestly, it's like just trying to keep up with the learning in the space, or, there's a new Python package that we could use for this thing, or there's a new type of model that gets created or invented. And, the applied scientists who focus on models are working on this, but they also need information science perspectives to understand whether it's going to work for our specific use cases. So it really is like, it's full on, as the Aussies say.
Definitely lifelong learning, and more at the self-pacedness of
absolutely
what you need. Yes. Well, Jane, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Part of what I work with students every day on is advocating how their information science and library science skill sets that they have learned at SILS and developed out there can be brought to bear in other in their professional lives. And it's, we talk all the time about we don't even know what jobs are going to be available and the titles. And so much of what you said resonated with making sure you know about yourself, that you can communicate with others about what talents you can bring to the next team that you're involved with. So it was really 100%. Interesting conversation. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lori. And yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity. Thanks to Ryan Shaw for sort of bringing this to my attention and giving me the opportunity to do this. Yeah, thanks for listening.